Hello and welcome. We're living in the age of AI, and one of the biggest questions at this moment is how should artificial intelligence be regulated? How fast can AI be allowed to grow? And what's the role that big tech needs to play in ensuring that artificial intelligence doesn't grow in a way that it becomes dangerous for mankind? To talk about some of the most pressing issues of the day, I'm joined in the capital Sundar Nursery by one of the top voices on global tech, the head of Meta's global affairs, Clegg. Welcome to Delhi, welcome to the Sundar Nursery, and thank you for joining us out here.
It's wonderful to be here.
It's lovely to have you with us. I want to start by talking to you, Clegg, about artificial intelligence and the manner in which it is capturing global imagination. And the biggest question of them all, who should regulate artificial intelligence? At Meta, sitting where you are in your global perch, how are you looking at this key question?
The first thing to say is AI is not new. It's been around for decades. There's a lot of hype at the moment around something called generative AI.
Sure.
Do you remember when ChatGPT burst onto the scene and you can ask it to write your school history essay or your wedding speech and it produces this beautiful text? And that, of course, has captured imagination. But I think it's somewhat obscured the reality that AI has been around for years. I mean, at Meta, for instance, we've been using AI for ages. Anything you see on Facebook or Instagram has in one way or another been touched by AI already. I think how to regulate them is a question of first working out what harms and problems you're trying to deal with. Is it intellectual property and copyright? Is it misinformation? And then ask yourself whether the current laws we have on the statute book are sufficient or not. And I suspect it'll be a mixture of the two. Some of the existing laws we have will be able to be applied to AI, and some new laws will be required. I hope, this is my hope, that as those new laws develop, they're developed as internationally as possible. Because this technology, it's very important to remember, this technology is bigger than any country, bigger than any company, so it needs to be dealt with together.
But when it comes to international regulation, different countries seem to be proceeding at different speeds.
Yeah.
In Europe, we're already seeing a far more robust regulatory framework than there is in the United States and even in India. And therefore, in India, we're still debating the privacy bill, which comes up in the monsoon session if the opposition were to allow it. And there is already an urgent need to be regulating AI. So what you're saying in principle sounds correct, but in reality, how do you see that being implemented?
I think there is as much a danger, interestingly enough, in rushing to regulate something that maybe hasn't been sort of properly analysed yet than there is about being too slow. So being too fast can also create problems because it means that you suffocate a lot of the innovation that will come from AI, or that at least would be the risk, which would be a great shame particularly for countries like India. I mean, India, it's not a question of if, it is a question of when India becomes one of the great digital superpowers of the world. It already has the world's second largest community of developers, and there are fantastic innovators, entrepreneurs, developers in India who are using AI today, and I think that culture of innovation, which is so strong in India, for which India is sort of globally famous, is something you don't want to sort of stymie by rushing to pass laws when it's not always obvious that new laws are necessarily the answer. I do think new laws will be necessary, but I think it's no bad thing to take a little bit of time to get it right.
That's the big tech view on it. A lot of AI practitioners, including those who've been involved in developing the field of artificial intelligence, have come out, passed resolutions demanding that there be an immediate pause on further development till the time regulators, government, society, citizens can understand the power of what has been unleashed. Do you think that's a good idea? Do you think that's a bad idea? Are we moving too fast?
Well, interesting that they're not saying that too much anymore. They were a couple of months ago. This debate is moving so quickly. I think there was a sort of eruption of existential concern, 2 or 3 months ago, when there was this view that AI, as I said earlier, could develop a kind of agency, an autonomy, a kind of capacity to think and develop plans of its own to replicate itself. But I think the more people have now calmly looked at the AI models that we have today, right now, I think people have kind of recognise that actually the models we have right now are far, far, far short of and nowhere near as powerful as that somewhat apocalyptic future suggests. Now, it may materialise, in which case it's a good thing we've had this debate at this stage. But right now, in terms of the capacity of what even the most advanced AI models can do, they don't have the autonomy and agency that we as human beings have. They're not going to suddenly turn on the human race in a way that I think was somewhat breathlessly suggested a few months ago.
A few years ago, Mark Zuckerberg and Facebook pivoted from Facebook to Meta. You were drawing out this grand vision of a metaverse, whereas the real revolution seems to have been in artificial intelligence. While you have been working in that sphere, would you accept that Meta was caught off guard? You were building one castle in the air, which is still looking like a castle in the air. You're moving incrementally towards your vision of Meta, whereas the real game seems to have been another one where you're now trying to catch up, but would you accept being caught off guard?
No, not really, on several counts. Firstly, you can't build the so-called metaverse. What does the metaverse mean? The metaverse basically means like a sort of immersive internet. So instead of looking at something on your phone, you're actually wearing glasses and you're communicating with people in avatar or even eventually in hologram form. You can't build that without AI. They're umbilically linked. And that's the reason why, far from catching up, we've actually been leaders in AI research for years. I mean, over the last decade, Meta has open sourced, shared over 1,000 AI databases and models, including, by the way, very powerful AI models, which help with the translation, the automatic translation of many languages, including the numerous languages in India. And we just last week did something which none of the big US tech companies have done so far, is that we have open sourced our latest large language model called Llama 2. What does that mean? That means that any academic, any researcher, any developer, any entrepreneur, any budding business person here in India, instead of having to build at the expense of billions of US dollars, their own large language model, because it's a very expensive thing to do. You need a huge amount of compute power and capacity, which generally only the very big tech companies have at the moment. You can literally just download the large language model yourself. You can download it from Azure on Microsoft or from Amazon or directly from the internet. It runs directly on Windows, and then you can innovate and you can create new large language, you can create new tools in financial services, in education, in health. I think that approach to open innovation is something we've always believed in, and I think will really help going forward as well.
But as you make more and more things available in an open source, the concern that raises is not just the good actors that you spoke about, but the potential of that open source technology then being misused by bad actors and then being put into play with the power of the computing that it brings to do very dangerous things. How are you trying to safeguard against that?
I think it is undoubtedly true that any technology, whether it's a car, whether it's the internet itself, whether it's emails, whether it's radio, any technology, it can be used by good people to do good things and bad people to do bad things. It is generally accepted that if you open these technologies so that you create a kind of wisdom of crowds, actually over time you make it safer, because it means that people can stress test these systems, they can look for flaws and failings, which the companies just working on their own, playing kind of whack-a-mole with their own systems, actually aren't nearly as good as lots of innovators. And by the way, it's one of the reasons why I think it's next month we are submitting our new large language models to something called DEF CON in Las Vegas, where a whole bunch of hackers come to town and they try and do as much sort of damage as they can. They probe these systems. I think that's a kind of open, innovative way of trying to make sure that these systems are not only really productive, but that they are as safe as they possibly can be.
From artificial intelligence, for a moment, I want to shift attention to Threads, which has gathered so much chatter over the past few days after its launch. And the question that while it launched with a lot of hype, user engagement and daily active users now seems to have come down quite a bit from the initial numbers. How are you seeing the manner in which Threads is playing itself out? What's the user case? What does it do different, which makes me, for example, want to move away from Twitter and come to Threads?
So look, I mean, firstly, when you get new apps, you always get this. There's a sort of eruption of interest. Lots of people kind of try use it 2 or 3 times, and then it falls off a bit as the people who are not going to be regular users kind of move on, and then you kind of get a core base of users, and then you build from that. And we've done that before, multiple times on Instagram, on Facebook with new features. And remember, Threads is how can I put it? It's a sort of work in progress. There are lots of new features which haven't been built yet, which we'll introduce over time. So that's not. I mean, that in a sense, we've done that before. We'll do it again. You get these kind of curves in the graph, if I can put it like that. But why do Threads? Well, because I think there are just a lot of people who are looking for a micro-blogging site where they can share news and views and kind of debate with people about stuff, whether it's about fashion or whether it's about sport, particularly when it's led by people you admire, creators, influencers, and so on, who don't necessarily find Twitter particularly attractive right now and want something which is a slightly kinder alternative, if I can put it like that. Sorry, it's not called Twitter anymore; it's called X, isn't it? So there's always there's space for more than one of those kind of micro-blogging sites. The interesting thing about Threads is we're building it very, very differently to things like Twitter. We're actually building it so that it will become part of something called the Fediverse, where you will be able to interoperably share your content on Mastodon, for instance. So it'll be a much more open platform where people will be able to share content across different sites. So it's not a sort of closed, walled garden. And we think that's going to be really interesting to see how that develops over time.
Because of the manner in which the data privacy around Facebook played itself out, for a while Facebook and Mark Zuckerberg became the bad boys of big tech. In the manner in which Elon Musk has taken over Twitter, turned it into X, do you think Elon Musk's actions make all of you at Meta look far more statesman-like, far more reasonable in some ways? He's giving Meta and your company a new lease of life by making Meta cool again.
We don't spend too much of our time kind of looking over our shoulders at what other people are doing. What Elon Musk does is he's clearly a strong-willed character who's used to getting his own way. Is up to him. We focus on what we think is good for the billions of people who use our apps. The wonderful thing is that more and more human beings around the planet are using our apps. I keep reading the papers, Facebook is something of the past. In fact, more human beings now use Facebook today than ever before. And you look at particularly the initial popularity of Threads, there's a real appetite for people to try out new ways of communicating with each other, reaching out to friends and family, debating things that they care about. And look, whether it's on building the new computing platform, so that we're building the kind of hardware, so that you can, instead of actually having to be with each other here physically as we are, if in the future
we could do it on the metaverse.
Yeah, in the future, you and I could walk in a virtual path. And by the way, because it already works like that, that the sound technology is so good, you really do think you're breathing the kind of same air, even if you might be thousands of miles apart. Whether it's that, whether it's Threads, whether it's all the innovations on Facebook, whether it's all the kind of fun and delight on Instagram, we will continue to innovate to appeal to something which is very visceral to all of us, which is how to communicate as human beings.
On a lighter note, about that cage match, as somebody looking at it, what's your wager? Is that a metaphor?
Oh my gosh, I've only got one answer if it happens. Of course, Mark Zuckerberg will win, and he's super fit, and he's really into fitness, is really into these sports, into Brazilian jiu-jitsu and MMA and so on. Yeah, but listen, I think, I don't know, I don't do it myself, but I think a lot of this is about technique, not just about size. Whether it'll actually happen or not, I honestly, I don't know.
On the issue of innovation, one of the concerns, and I'm curious what your thoughts on this are, is a lot of what Meta has done of late, whether it's Reels, whether it's Stories, whether it is Threads, seems to have been taken from somewhere where you adopted the idea, scaled it up, gave it volume, made it successful. But it isn't genuine innovation in the way that OpenAI did, or maybe some of the things that we've seen with Apple and Google. How founded or unfounded is this? How do you respond to this?
I don't think that's right at all. I don't think anyone can say that Facebook itself is not been one of the most innovative technologies over the last decade and a half. our huge investments now in building a new computing platform is something that we're pioneering in a way that nobody else is. And by the way, look, like car manufacturers will look at each other's products. The shirt you're wearing, your shirt manufacturer will be looking at other people. I mean, of course, people compare notes and see what is sort of moving and shaking in the market. But if you look at our big bets, whether it's our big bets on our social media platforms, whether it's our big bet on the metaverse, or indeed whether it's our long-standing investment in AI well before it became a major talking point. And just to give you an example of that, one of the foundational sort of technologies that everybody now in the AI industry uses is called PyTorch. That is something that Facebook engineers and researchers came up with. It's one of the foundational AI libraries, if I can put it like that everybody uses. So, look, I think you can both innovate whilst at the same time, of course, look at how people use technology as it evolves, and then evolve yourself, and that's exactly what we do as a company.
You handle public policy at Meta, and one of the big concerns in India is around the next general elections. We saw in the past in the United States, elsewhere in India, Facebook becoming a tool in the election fight. What are the lessons that you've learned globally and from your past experience in India about ensuring that Facebook is as fair, as bipartisan a platform building up to the next general elections?
So look, as you say, we have an immense amount of experience now about how elections play out on our platform, and it's worth remembering, elections take place around the world all the time. Mm-hmm. All the time. I think there are about 200 elections which have played out on Facebook and on our platforms over the last period of time. And look, much of the reason why people use Facebook is not actually about politics. Mm-hmm. It's not actually about elections. I mean, if you look at the total content on Facebook, I think it's now less than 3% is to do with kind of news and current affairs and so on. And yet, of course, we need to ensure that when people want to share political content and when there's the kind of all the arguments and the back and forth, that is done, as you say, firstly, that we are a neutral, as far as political opinions are concerned, we are a sort of neutral arbiter. Of course we are. We're a tech company. We're not a political party. But crucially, that it's done as safely and sensibly as possible. We now have dedicated teams. We use AI, as it happens, in an exceptionally sophisticated way, I would argue in an industry-leading way, in order to, for instance, detect any signs of foreign interference in elections on our platform. And we're determined to do this all over again here in India in the forthcoming Indian elections, much as we are in the United Kingdom elections next year or the US presidential elections next year as well. This is a constant, always-on kind of work for us.
The founder of Twitter, Jack Dorsey, said recently and created quite a stir in India when he suggested that there is greater interference from the Indian government on posts which are not favorable to the establishment than there is in other liberal democracies. What's been the Meta experience?
Look, we are present around the world, and we work with governments around the world. We're a law-abiding company. We will obviously abide by the local laws as they are stipulated. We also have our own standards, our own community standards, where we literally list and we revise these standards and update them all the time with a panel of international experts, where we lay out all the areas of the kind of content we don't want on our platform: harassment, bullying, copyright abuse, hate speech, and we also publish every 12 weeks, along with our financial results, exactly how much content we take down, under what category, do we find it ourselves or is it reported to us? So I think what we have developed over time, regardless of governments as they come and go, is a sort of a balance, if you like, where we obviously abide by the local laws in any country in which we operate, but also operate as transparently as possible about what's going on our platform. And in a sense, I don't think there's much more that we can reasonably be asked to do.
You're a politician, and you have the ability
I'm not a
to
politician. I
navigate,
was once a politician.
navigate tricky questions very smoothly. It didn't really answer my question. When it comes to interference from the government, is there more or less similar amount of interference as there in other countries?
No, I don't answer because I don't have a sort of league table in my head about. But one thing I can tell you is there are plenty of other jurisdictions, non-democracies, for instance, where there's far more aggressive pressure placed on social media platforms such as ourselves than there are in a vibrant, raucous democracy such as India. It doesn't mean that in my interactions with ministers here in Delhi and elsewhere, we don't have disagreements about this law or that provision. But that's the normal give and take between a private sector company, even a big one such as Meta, and the sovereign right of every government, particularly the government of, perhaps most especially the government of this great country, India, to make rules which sort of suit the local conditions of India itself.
You'd mentioned the need for global regulation.
Yeah.
In India, through the data privacy bill, which is going to be introduced, the focus is on data localization, ensuring that Indian data stays in India, because this is, after all, the age of data. Given these two contrasting impulses, how do you see the data privacy debate in India in the way that it's shaped up till this moment?
Well, I haven't seen the latest version of the legislation you refer to, but I very much hope that legislation will not include provisions to sort of, how can I put it, sort of divide up the data cake. Because, remember, one of the great things about the internet, or particularly the internet outside China, I should say, is that it is so open. It is so fluid. It doesn't recognize, in a sense, it doesn't recognize geography. The internet is something which everyone can relish and partake in and build businesses and communicate with each other. And that's also, of course, true in social media. And I think the great risk would be if India were to say, oh, well, we're going to hoard all this data to ourselves, then, I don't know, then Vietnam will do that next, and then the European Union will do that next, and the US will do it next. And before you know it, the global internet, as we know it, will have disintegrated and will have fragmented, which is why we believe that, and I hope this is how things will turn out, that it is actually in India's own interest, given India's very, very vibrant digital economy, and that India is already, and will soon become, as I say, it's not if, it's when India will become a global superpower in the digital economy. It is in India's own interest to keep data flows open. And particularly, by the way, I should say, at a time when the Europeans and the US have just recently, over the last couple of weeks, entered into a new agreement to ensure the continued open data flows across the Atlantic. And I think India and Europe and the US are the tripod, if I can put it like that, for the future governance of the online world. And the more that India, Europe and the US can align and work together, the better for us all.
We've spoken about elections. I want to spend a moment talking about the impact apps like Instagram have on the psyche of young kids, adolescents, teenagers, and so much research coming out. And this is not necessarily just to blame Meta, but just the reality of social media impacting impressionable minds. What are you doing to try and make all these apps safer for our young children?
Well, you mentioned research. As it happens, research is not conclusive at all. I mean, it's really quite a lot of research which suggests that for the vast majority of youngsters, being able to find community, find people that they can associate with, find people that they can share their experiences with, is actually a very good thing for their own sense of well-being. But of course, for people who are not feeling great about themselves or dealing with challenging issues in their lives anyway, and particularly if they're just passively scrolling and not interacting with other people, then it isn't always a great experience. So what we try and do is understand that, and then try and build features in Instagram which will help both parents and kids get the best experience possible. So we've just, I think over the last several months, we've rolled out 30 new features so that you can limit the amount of time you're on Instagram, far greater parental control so that parents have got greater visibility about what their kids are doing. Fantastic new feature which sort of nudges you. If you're just scrolling on the same thing over and over again, the same kind of content, our systems will say, hey, maybe you want to look at some different content now. So I think both with the research and with the new features that we're rolling out, everybody, whether it's government, parents, families, kids, or ourselves, we all have the same interest, which is to make sure that any experience online for young people is as wholesome and as positive as it can be.
You know, it's a bit hot and humid here in Delhi.
It sure
we just come by the lake. Let me get you something cold or maybe a coffee. Come, let's go. One of the things that concerns me, Mr. Clegg, is, and especially because we're in the business of news, is that Meta as a policy seems to be deprioritizing news. And even if I take my journalist hat off, a lot of consumers used Facebook news feeds to stay abreast of what was happening and to get a sense of what's happening globally. Just because of the kind of regulatory trouble that you got into, Facebook said, okay, we don't want to have anything to do with news, which is why, you know, you're now actively deprioritizing news. Is that fair, you think?
If you want to find news, if you want to share news on Facebook, you can do so. There's absolutely nothing stopping you from do so. And by the way, if you're a news publisher, which is the case on a huge scale around the world, if you want to reach your readers through Facebook, you can do that. And the vast majority, over 95% of news links on Facebook are posted there by the publishers themselves, by the newspapers themselves, because they have worked out that it's a great way of none of that. We don't want to impede any of that. That's great. It's just that the more we listen to the feedback from people who use our services around the world, we have seen a very discernible pattern, particularly in recent years, that people don't want their experience to be overwhelmed by news. Look, the vast majority of people go to Facebook for non-political, non-news reasons, to, you know, share pictures of their latest holiday, to organise a Facebook group for their daughter's football team, to share, you know, video of their barbecue. I mean, also it's family, it's friends, it's fun, it's inspiring. It's not, and so I think that's the nature of the product. That's the reason. That's the motive why most people.
That's how it started out, and then it evolved into a different form, and now you're deprioritizing that.
Do you know? I think the idea that there was any point at which the majority of people came to Facebook because they wanted to either consume or digest news was always somewhat exaggerated. That really has never been the principal motive. If you want to read news, read a newspaper, go to a news site. And by the way, as I say, we totally support and continue to build for the ability for publishers to reach their users on social media. It's a great way for publishers actually to both attract users to read their content and then direct them towards a subscription paywall or whatever. And that continues, and that's not going to change. But do we want to be in the business of artificially boosting news to our benefit, Facebook's benefit, and the detriment of publishers? Or is it to the benefit of publishers? And the evidence, by the way, is overwhelming. And there's been study after study after study. It's very simple. News publishers put their news links on Facebook. We don't do that. We don't do that. We don't, and nor, by the way, we don't scrape news. We're not a search engine, so not like Google. We don't have to scrape news headlines for snippets on search or anything. So news publishers put their links onto Facebook. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
They put.
Kya hai ye? Lemon soda. It's like a Indian version of Nimbu Pani. Hopefully you like it. Yeah.
Thank you. The news publishers put their content, their links onto Facebook. That attracts users. They then can redirect their users to their subscription paywall. That's how they earn money. So the value flows to the publishers. We don't, you know, we don't look for news. We don't scrape news. We don't ask for it. We don't particularly need it or want it. So it'd be very ironic for us to be told by law that we have to kind of write a check to publishers for content that we don't need, don't want, don't seek, and where actually the value exchange between the platform and the publishers benefits the publishers more than it benefits us. You can't ask any company, any industry in a open market economy to basically cross-subsidize another industry when there's absolutely no reason to do so, and all the facts point in the opposite direction. So we don't want to get into a great big kind of running battle here, but equally we're simply not going to just accept that we have to start writing checks to other industries when in fact they benefit from posting their own content voluntarily onto our platforms.
One of the big concerns about the use of social media has been fake news.
Yeah.
And while Meta partners with various organizations globally on fake news, I read recently
very good.
that, it's got some masala in it,
Great.
so it's not the way the Americans
No, I
or
like
the British would have it. But one of the big concerns is that artificial intelligence models were being skewed in a way that they started thinking that fake news was real. How do you prevent that? Because you've built some guardrails so far in the work that you've done with the Global Fact Check Network, but that the problem seems to be changing all the time.
Yeah.
AI models getting trained to start thinking that something which is fake is actually true. You can skew it by just pumping it out.
I think the thing to remember about AI and misinformation, or indeed any undesirable deep fakes, disinformation, anything that we don't want on the platform is, yes, it is true that AI might make it a bit easier for someone to produce a fake image, for instance. But that's not new. I mean, Photoshop's been around for years. You can fiddle around, stick someone's head on someone else's body, been able to do that for years. But it's true you might be able to do it a bit more quickly now. But it's also conversely the case that AI is our best defense. I'll give you a very concrete example. The prevalence, in other words, the proportion as a percentage of the total content on Facebook of hate speech on Facebook today is now as low as 0.02%. So that means if you were just scrolling endlessly on your newsfeed and you saw 10,000 bits of content, 2 bits of that, 2 bits of content might be hate speech. We've got it down so low. In fact, it's reduced by over 50% over the last couple of years, precisely because of AI. And the thing to remember about content moderation systems on platforms like Facebook is, from our point of view, it doesn't matter whether it's a human being or a robot that's produced the bad content. Our systems will still try and pick that up, regardless of how it's been generated. So I agree with you, it's an adversarial space. I agree with you that it's changing all the time. I'm actually quietly quite optimistic that the latest advances in AI almost help us strengthen our defences as much, if not more so, than help people produce bad content in the first place.
As we come to the last part of this interview, I want to spend a moment with you, Mr. Clegg, talking about how Meta views the India market at this moment. We saw in years gone by, Facebook at that time built out a whole organizational structure in India, having a full business head. Now, from the looks of it, in the manner in which that pyramid is being dismantled, from the outside, I wonder if Facebook organizationally is deprioritizing India.
Oh no, I mean, look, I don't want to suggest that my travel arrangements are the most important thing for Facebook, but I'm one of the more senior executives in the company, and this is my second visit in well under a year, and I will keep coming back over and over again because it is a tremendously important market for us. There are hundreds of millions of Indians who use Facebook, who use WhatsApp, who use Instagram, Facebook too, but Instagram and WhatsApp are the, really obviously the big apps here, and more than that, I think, for instance, Prime Minister Modi's vision of building a $5 trillion digital economy by the end of this decade, I think that's realizable. I think if you look at the talent here, I was in Mumbai yesterday talking to some of the digital entrepreneurs there. The creativity, the hunger, the energy is fantastic. I think you've got the second largest to online developer community in the world here in India, and that's only going to grow. Look at all the Indian engineers and leaders in Silicon Valley who lead some of the greatest, the biggest tech companies in the world. So as I said earlier, not only is India,
but not so much at Meta. Unlike a lot of companies where their top shot tech honchos are of Indian origin, it's not quite the case just at Meta, where just in the exclusive club right at the top.
Well, actually, that's not quite right. I mean, the most senior executive who's dealing with all of the multi-billion-dollar investments into our infrastructure to build these AI models is a very proud Indian, and is exceptionally good at his work. And there are many, many other very senior folk who have either Indian heritage or are Indian who work at Meta, as is the case, by the way, across Silicon Valley. But it's not really about an individual
Sure, of
here and
course.
an individual there.
Yeah, of course.
It's just about the size, the dynamism, and the ambitions of the country, the extraordinary gifts that people have here in the core sciences that are relevant to technology, and of course the way that everyday people use our apps and use tech for everything, to run their business, to communicate with their families, to say good morning to people, to wish them a happy birthday, to buy and sell. I mean, look at the way that WhatsApp here is used in a much more versatile way than it is in most parts of the world, not just to communicate, but to negotiate, to transact. And I think that is really a kind of clue to the future, and it's the reason why, far from sort of diminishing somehow our commitment to this country is only going to grow in the future. And it's one of the reasons why, hot on the heels of our landmark announcement last week to share and open source our latest AI technology, I was with other senior tech executives at a meeting in the White House in DC on Friday. We all met with President Biden and his team, and the first country I wanted to come and visit and talk further about this with policymakers is India, for a very good reason. Because the future, if you want to understand the future of the internet, if you want to understand the future governance of the internet, in my view, it's being built here in India.
Before you put on your public policy role at Meta, you're a very successful British politician. And I wonder, what did politics teach you about...
If I was that successful, I probably would still be in British politics. But
no,
anyway.
you are very successful. What did politics in Britain teach you about handling the politics of big tech in the US? A lot of the senior executives around Mark Zuckerberg have come and gone, except those who started out as part of his initial gang. You're extremely close. And I wonder if politics had a role in helping you navigate the politics of big tech.
Well, look, we're a social media company. I mean, we're many other things besides, but we're a social media company in essence, and we deal with the most fluid, complex, dynamic, wonderful and controversial thing of all, which is human speech. We're not selling widgets, we're not sending rockets up into the sky or selling cars. We're doing something way more difficult, which is human beings using our technology to communicate with each other. And that necessarily sucks into it moral, ethical, societal, legal and political debates. And it is totally legitimate that governments in particular take a very keen interest in what's going on these platforms. So of course, what was it, 4.5 years ago, it was not illogical for Mark Zuckerberg, you know, he's one of the great entrepreneurs of our age, he's an engineer, to say, do you know what, it would be quite handy to have someone working alongside me who kind of comes from a different world, from politics, because it's affecting, if you like, how these tech companies operate more and more and more. And look, time will tell whether that was a sensible decision of his. But for me, at least, I remember at the time thinking, relishing the idea, notwithstanding all the controversy, of trying to grapple with these really complex issues, but you know, the boundary between, as you said earlier, moderating content and free expression. One person's hate speech is another person's right to free speech. These are ancient debates about liberty and security, safety and free expression, which are just mutating in modern form on these platforms. So of course, for me, as someone who is in British and European political life for close to 2 decades, it was and it remains an amazing opportunity in the private sector to be grappling with these highly consequential political and kind of ethical concerns.
You know, we asked you some tough questions. You navigated them with admirable skill. You've said what you had to. You've also made clear you won't be getting into that cage.
No, I'm not.
Maybe once
I'm
this
56,
is over.
I don't think I'm the right age for cage fighting.
Not this leg, but when you're back at the hotel, maybe you can get a dip. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much
for joining us. Thank you. Pleasure.
Thank you.